Alright guys, so this is going to be the second problem we're going to take a look at. This was problem number 34 on the homework, and it's just one of the division problems that we had. And I think the majority of us that struggled with this problem struggled because of the remainder. Alright, so usually whenever we're just dividing two numbers, we think about punching that division into a calculator. And if the numbers don't go into one another evenly, then the calculator is just going to give us a decimal answer. But for a problem here where you're asked for a remainder, the idea or a good way to think about it, I think, is let's say that we had 7 apples and we wanted to put those 7 apples into 2 buckets. So this is kind of like looking at 7 divided by 2. Now the one caveat here is that we want to put the same number of apples into each bucket. So if you have 7 apples and you're putting them into 2 buckets, we would be able to put 3 of our apples into the first bucket, 3 of our apples into the second bucket, but then we would have that 1 apple left over. Right? And we couldn't put that apple in one of the buckets because then that bucket would contain more apples than the other. So we would consider that 1 apple the remainder. All right, so let's go ahead and work through this problem. Because here we would have 1,272 apples and we'd be putting them into 43 buckets. We can't really just do that one in our head. All right, so a very common setup that you'll see for these problems when we are dividing is you want to see how many times does 43 go into, and you always start with the number furthest to the left underneath your division symbol. So 43 cannot go into the number 1. The number 1 is far too small. So now you include the next number as well. How many times can 43 go into 12? Well, we still have the same problem. 12 is far too small. So now we need to bring in the next number as well. So now we're thinking, how many times does 43 go into 127? So let's take a look at this and use our calculator to help us out. So let's say that our first guess is maybe it's 2 times. So what's 43 times 2? So 43 times 2 is 86, and that is a number that is smaller than 127. So 43 does go into 127 2 times. Let's see if 43 goes into 127 3 times. 43 times 3. That is 129. So notice that 129 is too large. So that means that our first guess of 2 was correct. So 43 goes into 127 2 times. So notice that I placed our 2 above the furthest number to the right underneath our division sign. So 43 here times 2, that is equal to 86. And you write that product underneath, right? So 43 times 2 is 86. And now what we actually do is we subtract. All right, and what we're really doing is we're now finding the remainder, what we have left over when we take 127 and subtract 86 away. Let's see what we get. 127, take away 86, and we are left with 41. So once again, we're just subtracting here. We did 127 minus 86, and we got 41. So now the next step is that you want to take the next number underneath the division sign, and you want to bring that number down. So in this case, we want to drop down this 2 here. So instead of looking at the number 41, which 43 does not go into, you need to bring down this 2, and now we're looking at 412. 43 will go in to 412. Let's figure out how many times. So why don't we see if 43 times 8. Let's see where that gets us to. So 43 times 8 is 344. So that is a number that is smaller than 412. So 43 times 8 goes into 412. Let's try 43 times 9 and see what we get. 43 times 9, that's 387. So that puts us closer to 412 without going over, which is what we're looking for. Let's now do 43 times 10. Maybe some of us are thinking that's going to be 430, right? 43 times 10, just add a 0 to get 430, and 430 takes us over 412. We don't want to go over, so we are looking at 43 times 9. Okay, so now let's take 43, multiply it by 9 to remind us what that was again. Not a very common multiplication. At 387. So 43 times 9 is 387. All right, so remember, we didn't use 10 because we used 10, we got a number that was larger than 412. In particular, it was 430. So just like last time, we would now subtract. And let's see how much we have left over. So 412 minus 387. 412 minus 387 is 25. All right. So notice here, guys, that the number 43 does not go into the number 25 because the number 25 is smaller than 43. And we no longer have any other numbers to bring down here. If we did, we would just bring down the next number and continue the process as we've been doing. But since there are no other numbers, this is your final remainder. And we usually just write that with a capital R, and then you follow that capital R with your number. So we would just say R25. So what we are saying here is that 1,272 divided by 43 is 29 remainder 25. Thinking about our apples, right? If we had 1,272 apples and were told to put them into 43 buckets, we would be able to put 29 apples into each of the 43 buckets, but then there would be another 25 apples remaining or left over. Right? Remember, we couldn't put one of each of those into a bucket because then 25 of the buckets would contain 44 apples and the other 4 buckets would only contain 29 apples. All right, and we can also show this on the calculator as well. Let's take a look at that. So when you take 1,272 and divide it by 43, we get 29. So that means we would get 29 43s. 43 times 29. And we would still have another 25 extra. So add on another 25 to get to our original value of 1,272.